Since it's such a large slate of 15 games, minus, as Daigle mentioned, the Panthers and the Bucks, let's get into all the games. Again, in this show, we go game by game. We go and cover every single fantasy relevant player out there. So let's do our best. Let's live up to the challenge. Hayden Winks, we'll start with you. With the 9-2 New Orleans Saints, who are 2.5-point road favorites against the Atlanta Falcons, a 45.5 total. Hayden, I feel like the Taysom Hill question and discussion is still out there. But to me, the real conversation should be about Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray. And if Murray is now a strong start each and every week attached to Taysom Hill.
So Alvin Kamara, for expected fantasy points, he was averaging 23.8 points with Drew Brees. That's dropped down to 9.7 in the two games with Taysom Hill. And the reason why that's happening is he's running fewer routes from 27 down to 12.5. And that's because you're seeing a lot of QB power. You're seeing a lot more scrambling. You're seeing a lot less checkdowns, and you're seeing a more conservative game plan in general. They're playing really slow. They're running the ball a lot. So I don't think that Alvin Kamara is just like suddenly going to rebound. Now, I do think last week's game probably was the floor because the Saints knew they were going to win. Like, the Broncos couldn't move the ball at all. So I think all these guys, Kamara, Michael Thomas, are going to play better in a much closer game this week. They're only 3.5 spread right now. And I think you're going to see all these guys have a little bit better of a game compared to last week.
Yeah, you can throw last week in the trash. I mean, the Saints knew from the opening whistle they could basically experiment or maybe kind of testing Taysom Hill's limits, although they didn't actually do that since he only passed like 18 times. They should have basically seen what he could actually do as a passer last week. They did not do that. And Hayden hit the nail on the head. I mean, one catch in 2 games, I mean, that is a fluke, I think. But I mean, the catch floor is way down. Obviously, it's going to be probably more like 3 to 4 instead of 7 to 8. And it's the QB power runs that are the bigger threat. And just, the whole style of the offense. Like, Latavius Murray was already mixing in, for 9 to 10 weekly carries before this, but now it's seeming more like 11 to 12. And this is what Hayden said, with overall decreased volume. So to me, the passing will maybe kind of stabilize a little bit, but it's really the running game for Alvin Kamara, I feel like the biggest threat is. And regarding him as like a low-end RB1 right now. And I mean, I think some people are treating him more as like an RB2, and I don't even think that's wrong. And very unfortunate for the fantasy playoffs.
Michael Thomas is, of course, taken away because Taysom Hill has targeted him on 8 attempts for a 46% target share. But honestly, I look at this game, and although we think these offenses are potent, the fact is the defenses have carried these teams the past month of the season. Falcons defense, no more than 17 points in 3 of their last 4 contests. The Saints defense, no more than 13 points over the last month of the season. So I actually think the total, which Josh, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I think it's 47.5. I think it's warranted. I actually think it's an under game, and I don't expect anything from these offenses. We look at 40 points for the Falcons last week. Ryan averaged 4.7 yards per attempt. They only scored because Carr fumbled the ball twice inside their own 20, and the Falcons just turned around. So I'm worried about both offenses in this game.
That's, I think, absolutely valid. And there were points earlier this season when we were a little nervous if the Saints team could be balanced because their defense wasn't performing well. They've vaulted all the way up to the number 2 ranked defensive DVOA, both against the run and against the pass. And it's because everyone is back healthy and playing at an extremely high level. I did want to talk more about Taysom Hill, but we can just have that another time. We can talk about it in Rotoworld Live on Sunday if we want to. So let's now focus on this Falcons offense, because this is a unit constantly this season, unless they were given, short fields like they were last week against the Raiders, that has struggled without Julio Jones. Just before we clicked record on this show, Julio Jones was downgraded to out on Thursday's practice. It seems like if it's trending in this direction, he will not be playing. But they do get Todd Gurley back, who, if he has not found the end zone, I mean, Todd Gurley is the captain of the bus column this season, because his output when not scoring a touchdown, 6.1, 9.7, and 3.9 points. He has not exceeded 6 receiving yards in 7 of 10 games this season. I just think that while Calvin Ridley can still get home, the rest of this Falcons offense is going to mightily struggle if Julio Jones is out.
We saw this matchup 2 weeks ago, and Todd Gurley had 9 touches 8 carries for 26 yards, and he was fully healthy, supposedly, that game. So, again, do you start Todd Gurley? No. You don't start Todd Gurley, especially if they don't have Julio Jones. It's so easy, in my opinion, to just fade everyone but Calvin Ridley.
I think you still have to play that baseline RB2 touches. It's like I have Todd Gurley as like the RB20 or 21 this week, and Matt Ryan, he's thrown more than 1 touchdown in 5 of 11 starts. Julio Jones has played most of those games. This is not a good fantasy quarterback this year. Horrible matchup this weekend. No Julio. He's like QB 18, QB 19. By the way, Taysom Hill QB 4'd the Falcons 2 weeks ago. What are we expecting a reprise of that? Got him in the top 10 this week, but I'm all aboard John's defensive slugfest narrative for this game, which will not be the narrative for this game.
I will say the only person on the I think Calvin Ridley's in a really good spot. The Saints, just because of the way they played their defense, a lot of cover one, and they're getting beat deep a lot this year because they're challenging in man coverage, and they left Calvin Ridley on an island a lot last week or in week 11. If there's no Julio Jones, you're going to see a bunch of targets for Calvin Ridley. I think that he can have a ceiling game. Everyone else, I'm kind of with Daigle where you have to really watch yourself. I think you have to play Hayden Hurst because who else are you playing at tight end? I think you have to play Todd Gurley because who else are you playing at running back? But the ceiling potential for those guys is really, really, really limited.
And to your point, Pat, the only issue with Taysom Hill, yes, the rushing juice is there. He's now scored 2 rushing touchdowns in each of his back-to-back games here. But he was the QB 13 overall last week because he passed for 78 yards and a pick. And I genuinely think the Falcons need an answer for him. So if he's just living off of this touchdown deodorant inside the 20, that's certainly an issue in this spot.
Pat, before we move on, where do you have Latavius Murray ranked? Because to me, it's one of the biggest conundrums right now in fantasy football. It's a player who is running back insurance, but is playing far more than that in the 2 starts that we have for Taysom Hill.
Yeah, it's pretty much the worst thing ever. His touch floor, carries floor is basically like RB2, but I have him ranked as like the RB 28, 29. And because like I said, even before Taysom, he was getting like 10 to 12 weekly carries, and now that's looking more like 12 to 14. And the touchdown potential is pretty good for Latavius. It's not like amazing, but it's like, the over-under every week for him is probably 0.5. He's got like a 50 shot at scoring a touchdown in this power offense right now. And it's not fun, but his carries baseline is much higher than a lot of people like Devin Singletary or even like Zach Moss. So,
I believe Andrews Pete returned to practice this week too, so that's a significant upgrade for the Saints. All right, let's move on to the next game on this list, and that is the 4-7 Detroit Lions going to the Chicago Bears. The Bears at home are 3-point favorites. They're also 5-6 in the season, a total of 44.5 in this game. We know DeAndre Swift is still in concussion protocol. We know that Kenny Galladay has already been ruled out of this game. We know that Mitch Trubisky is starting at quarterback for the Bears. So, John Daigle, big task for you. Make this game interesting.
Packers-Bears? I'm sorry, not Packers-Bears. It's Thursday, everyone, and it feels like Monday. Lions.
Bears, yes.
The teams.
True. So Trubisky has thrown 3 touchdowns in each of his last 4 games against the Lions. It actually is a somewhat very good spot. Also has a higher target share to Allen Robinson. That's encouraging than Nick Foles does. Having said that, it's going to depend if we get DeAndre Swift because, as we expected, we saw, even against the Texans, Lions couldn't move the ball without Kenny Galladay and Swift last week. And I would expect it's the same thing. Reports don't sound good about DeAndre Swift, who practiced a little bit on Wednesday and then got downgraded and is continuing to work through the protocol as of Thursday morning. And so if there is no Swift and no Galladay again, do we expect Stafford and the Lions offense to move the ball? Of course not. So, outside of Trubisky, Allen Robinson, and perhaps David Montgomery, who just because of one primetime run is now getting overblown. He only had 9 carries. So it's like we're putting that on a pedestal and forgetting that David Montgomery has not been good on 20-plus touches all year long. Those are really the only players you're looking at for the Bears offense.
I've got David Montgomery, unfortunately, in the top 15, and nothing has ever made me feel worse.
You're guilty, Pat.
Yeah, it was, the big run. He did seem to have a little more overall juice last week. I don't know. Maybe he laid off the turkey. Like, he viewed that as the week, like, get in shape. And, if you're ever chasing David Montgomery points is obviously the grossest thing you can maybe ever do in fantasy football. But the Lions do surrender the most running back fantasy points. Not a good defense, not a good run defense. They just fired. This has actually probably helped the defense firing Matt Patricia, I guess. But yeah, I mean, the guy David Montgomery, as we saw when he was out, the Bears didn't come up with an alternative. The backfield was somehow even worse when he was out. Like, he is plan A, B, and C in the backfield. So the touches are not threatened. The matchup is good. And yeah, it is the worst thing in the world. David Montgomery is a top 15 running back this week.
I think I have him like at RB12. And in addition to all this, the Lions placed Danny Shelton, the huge nose tackle, on injured reserve. And they were already bad. And they're probably going to be without Jeffrey Okudah. And they just placed Desmond Trufant on injured reserve. The Lions defense, when fully healthy, is already one of the bottom 5 units in the league. Now they lost 3 of their best players. So, I mean, I think Allen Robinson is a wide receiver 1, right back where he was earlier in the year. And I think David Montgomery is going to flirt with top 15 numbers by volume and by matchup this week.
Yeah, I mean, the Lions know that their season's over. They're packing it in for the rest of the season. I would say, hey, because of that, I would take the over in this game. But Hayden, the Lions are projected for almost 21 points in this contest. I don't think there's any way that they get to 21 points here against the Bears. Pat?
I'll just say, I mean, DeAndre Swift, they really need him to return. Like John said, it's looking pretty dicey. Darrell Bevell was talking up pace this week. Would do a lot of wonders for this Lions offense. Maybe look a little more like the offense we thought we'd be getting coming into the season. And the Bears defense, too, I mean, looked like a defeated unit last week. Like, the Bears kind of looked like, this is projection, of course, when you say this from watching a game on TV. But the Bears definitely kind of looked like a team that was shutting down last week. I mean, extremely poor tackling, a lot of big plays against a much better offense than the Green Bay Packers. But if DeAndre Swift plays, that is the key. I could see the Lions offense overperforming expectations.
Well, I think the Bears are missing Akeem Hicks again this week. I don't think he practiced yesterday as well. So I think in addition to the pace you're going to get, you're also going to get away from the run game. The Lions over the last month are 31st in neutral pass rate. But again, in this on the road in Chicago, this isn't the week to go to the Lions. I think maybe after this week, if you get Kenny Golladay back, DeAndre Swift back, if they're playing with more tempo, if they're passing the ball more, maybe you can get a little juice at the end. But this is not the week to trust the Lions at all.
Let's move on to the 7-4 Indianapolis Colts going to the Houston Texans. Total of 51.5 with the Colts 3.5 point favorites here. Daigle, we've talked about it on the waiver show earlier this week. There's only one question in this game, and it's how much will the loss of Will Fuller impact the Texans' offense? We know that Deshaun Watson has, in my eyes, been a top 3 player, regardless of position, in the NFL this season. But we also know that his splits without Will Fuller include a drop of about 50 passing yards per game. So how's it going to look?
8.7 yards per attempt to 7.2 in 18 career games without Will Fuller. Of course, he had DeAndre Hopkins previously to lean on. In those games, he was worse as well. Now he has Brandon Cooks, Isaiah Coulter, who they called Big Plays A, I found out, at Rhode Island University, and Kiki QT. So you have to ask yourself, what is Watson's floor? Have we seen it? Is it possible he can hit a floor because he's such a magician and such a good player? I really don't know, but if there was a spot, it would obviously be this one against the Colts defense, who plays with a defense, of course, a zone defense by Eberflus that will limit the big plays, I would imagine. And now we don't have the big play guy for this offense. David Johnson may come back, but what does that matter outside of taking Duke Johnson off the field? Although he's progressively seen fewer carries in every single start for David Johnson so far. So yeah, I think Kiki QT has the highest floor in place of Will Fuller. Brandon Cooks is obviously the only option you can really trust. Coulter could get involved a little bit here. Having said that, I think Jordan Akins is the big winner here. Not only can you start Akins and take less of an opportunity cost because he plays tight end, you probably don't have a tight end you trust anyways, so you just plug him in hoping he soaks up some of these 11.6 vacated targets, Randall Cobb and Will Fuller in the interim, rather than leaning on QT for the rest of the season.
Yeah, Isaiah Coulter in a GPP DFS, guys. Am I right?
No.
No.
Hey, he's 6'2", 4.45 wheels. Had a very strong training camp. That's all I'll say. But as we're talking about, it's not just Will Fuller. Randall Cobb is on injured reserve, 2 more games. They cut Kenny Stills in one of the worst timed moves in NFL history, basically. And I agree with Josh. I mean, I'm repeating myself from earlier this week, so sorry if you heard or I've already heard this. But I mean, Deshaun Watson was playing at an MVP level, averaging almost 9 yards per attempt with a 70% completion percentage and only 5 turnovers and 11 starts. I mean, he was lighting the world on fire, and it's just such a shame that the supporting cast falls apart heading into one of his toughest matchups of the year, too. And someone who was beginning to look like locked in top 5 or 6 every week, regardless of matchup at quarterback, it's now like more QB 10 to 12 range. Maybe he'll do a little more power running. He did that in like the Hurricane in Cleveland a few weeks ago. I mean, he's capable of doing that when their offense is, in trouble. But yeah, he's a low-end QB1 now for the fantasy playoffs.
Hey, Josh, so I'm curious what your thoughts are on Kiki Kuti coming out as like a prospect, because when I'm looking at him right now, 5'11", 180, he's a slot receiver.
Correct.
If the Texans go into two receiver sets and use 2 more tight ends, is he going to be the second receiver? Because that means he's going to be pushed on the boundary a little bit more than what you would want. But the one thing is, with this zone defense, 2 deep, zone underneath, I think Kiki Kuti is the type of guy that's going to be sitting in the zones. He knows what he's doing from the air raid. And his 2 games, he has 2 career 100-yard games, both of them against the Colts historically. So
with Aberfluss as well.
Yeah, so I think I'm okay with Kuti in like PPR formats as a flex play immediately, just because the matchup tells me that this is the way he's going to win against these soft zone coverages.
Yeah, and there are a couple questions that I have that I forgot to bring answers to today. One is that the Colts are allowing a league-high 12 yards per completion over their past 3 games, the most in the league, which, as Daigle and Hayden, you're referring to, it seems like their defense is typically set up to prevent those. So I don't know, one, why that's happening, but also not having DeForest Buckner last week against the Tennessee Titans was worst case scenario. I mean, this is one of the reasons why that defense emerged as a top 5, top 10 unit for much of the season. And then he goes down immediately when facing Derrick Henry. And maybe you guys can fill me in. I don't know if he's missing this contest either. So if he does, I'm not saying that David Johnson or Duke Johnson or whoever is a good play, but the overall ceiling and capacity of its Colts defense takes a major notch down. And to me, it would then reside in the territory of, who cares? We don't care about this group, versus the Colts at points this season has been, we need to take this defense into account. So
yeah, and there's also Bobby Okereke, who's didn't play last week, is still kind of questionable this week. So they need DeForest Buckner. Like he's the person that unlocks the rushing defense, because the way they play, they don't have enough guys in the box typically. So you have to have DeForest Buckner in there to at least clog the run. So we don't know if we're getting David Johnson or not, but I think that if David Johnson comes back, I'm expecting him to be like immediately plugged into like RB2 land again.
And unfortunately, we don't get a lot of these answers until like 11:30 on Sunday morning now. So we'll just have to wait and then pivot then. Daigle, let's talk about this Colts offense, if you will, because we know last week that Jonathan Taylor missed. And that Colts offense was immediately working from behind, if you don't count that first Trey Burton drive where it seemed like he caught 7 passes for 170 yards. But while Nyheim Hines has had explosive games this year, Jordan Wilkins has had his moments. We always talk about Jonathan Taylor. Frank Reich is very invested on Jacoby Brissett being the goal line back, and it's working. And how can you hold it against him? But that hurts us and the values of all these other running backs, correct?
Correct. That is the issue also for Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines as well, because even if we want to play them, Jordan Wilkins, to your point, no more than 9 touches in each of the last 3 games. Seems like he's the one who's been losing out. They even came out on Monday and said he's been banged up, and they seem pretty skeptical to play him right now. So I would think we're down to a 2-man committee between Taylor or Hines. And assuming garbage time here, assuming the Texans can't move the ball, that would mean probably Jonathan Taylor, who is the better overall back in early downs over Hines anyhow. The issue, of course, is, as you said, we have Brissett coming in on the goal line twice this past week, actually, and running it in, and Reich said he's not going to stop that. Like, that's part of the offense. Honestly, he's scoring, so why would they? They don't care about fantasy players. Just fine. Rivers has still thrown for 300 yards and or multiple touchdowns in 5 of his last 6 starts. But again, even Rivers, who's been pretty good in good matchups through the air, even hard to depend on him as a streamer because Brissett's going to come in and soak up these touchdowns. So it makes it tough for all, even though I do think it may be a Jonathan Taylor week if you assume that the Texans won't be able to move the ball.
It's weird. Nyheim Hines, he's exceeded 13.5 half PPR points 4 times, and twice it was against the Titans. So I don't know if it's just some weird matchup specific thing. And of course, last week, Taylor being out. I think, Nyheim Hines, second half of the season, has looked like the best overall Colts running back. Definitely the only one offering kind of consistent playmaking juice. But then, the week before he was on the COVID list, Jonathan Taylor had by far his best game since week 2. So I gave the preponderance of evidence. I thought I had to give Nyheim Hines the higher ranking, but I have both in the RB 20 to 30 range. And I would not be surprised if Jonathan Taylor ended up outpointing Nyheim Hines this week.
I think I have Jonathan Taylor a little ahead of that because the Texans are allowing 142 rushing yards to running backs this week. The worst in the league. But the Colts are also going to be without left tackle Anthony Costanzo. And the last time he was out, the Colts offense kind of tanked a little bit. So that's a potential concern. I think they're getting the center, Kelly, back, but we'll have to keep an eye on that. I think the other thing is Bradley Roby got suspended. That's their top corner. The corners behind him are rough. So I think Michael Pittman's in play this week.
Thank you.
T.Y. Hilton, I still don't think you can fully go back to it, but the ceiling is higher because the outside corners for the Texans right now are super slow, and Phillip Rivers is playing at least decently well right now.
T.Y. Hilton last week scored his first touchdown since week 7 of the 2019 season. So I don't know how optimistic anyone can be about that, even though I agree with you. Even with Anthony Costanzo being out, this should be one of those scenarios where Phillip Rivers has more time than usual to sit back there behind this offensive line.
Per Hayden Winks' usage model, who is now touting T.Y. Hilton. Hilton had all of his targets, catches, and touchdown in garbage time when the Colts were up 35-14 or down 35-14 last week. Pittman, meanwhile, 9 targets, still led the team in routes run and has led the team in route run the past month. So I'm not chasing Hilton at all, but Pittman, I will be all in on this week.
So I have concerns about our Zoomer, who is always touting the baby boomer receivers like A.J. Green, Sammy Watkins, and T.Y. Hilton. Hayden is all aboard the boomer receivers.
As a wide receiver 4, you can do worse this week. That's all I'm saying.
Pat, he works with us, so he does respect his elders. So I wouldn't expect anything else. All right, moving on to the Cincinnati Bengals and the Miami Dolphins. Miami, 11.5-point favorites at home. The total is 42.5 in this game, and we know the Dolphins are 7-4, and the Bengals do not matter. So this is the situation we have right now. The running back situation for Miami. Salvon Ahmed returned on a limited basis on Wednesday. DeAndre Washington missed Wednesday's practice, and Matt Breida is in the doghouse. Also, at quarterback, Brian Flores has said he will not name a starter until Sunday morning. Thanks, Brian. Then we look at Cincinnati. In Brain Allen's first start last week, Tyler Boyd produced just 15 yards on 3 of 6 targets. T. Higgins caught all 5 of his targets for 44 yards and a touchdown. I might add, Pat, that was against the Giants' 25th ranked pass defense, according to DVOA. What do we think that Brandon Allen is capable of against this Miami Dolphins pass defense? While they gave up a few yards to some other teams, are still the number 9 pass defense. And we have seen them completely bottle up far more talented players like Jared Goff and Justin Herbert.
It's going to be a problem, Josh.
Thank you.
T. Higgins'
we can move
touchdown came in the final 2 minutes of the game, and now T. Higgins going up against the Dolphins' boundary corners with Brandon Allen under center. Going to be a problem. And you were laying out the confusing situation on the Dolphins side. That didn't even take into account Myles Gaskin could also return, but they don't have to issue practice reports on him since he's still technically on injured reserve. So we just have really no clue what's going to be happening with the Dolphins offense. So Tua's got a thumb. That's not the kind of injury a quarterback can really gut through. I think, especially with competitive reasons on top of health reasons, it'll probably still be Ryan Fitzpatrick. But I take the Dolphins at their word that they're not going to announce this until Sunday morning. Brian Flores is a very competitive advantage head coach, and it's been working out for him. But it's almost impossible to project what's going on with the Dolphins, because even a receiver where we know who will be playing, Devontae Parker has such good chemistry with Ryan Fitzpatrick and has not demonstrated that whatsoever with Tua.
I will say last week we were asked which running back would get the touches, and all they did was say, screw it. Fitzpatrick threw 34 times to 10 running back carries through 3 quarters to build the lead. And then they gave the ball to DeAndre Washington in garbage time. So maybe they just lean on Fitzpatrick again because it's another great spot. And honestly, since the week 1 road game against the Patriots, Fitzpatrick has averaged 22 fantasy points per game in his last 6 starts. He's been great. So name the starter, you're starting him and you're starting Devontae Parker, who has a 40% target share from him. The running backs, in my opinion, unless Gaskin is activated on Saturday, you really still can't.
There was a report from the Miami Herald that was saying that there's some internal optimism that Tua is going to be able to play. And if you're looking at Flores' remarks earlier in the year, he was saying that Tua is their guy if he's healthy. So I think it's truly up in the air. But I do think there is a difference between Tua starting and Ryan Fitzpatrick. Because Ryan Fitzpatrick, you get the YOLO balls. I still think Devontae Parker is like really earning like wide receiver 2 consideration. He's averaging 17.4 expected PPR points over the last like 5 or 6 games without Preston Williams. And I mean, the Bengals can't cover anybody. So yeah, I will say if it's Myles Gaskin or Salvon Ahmed, if it's just one of those 2 guys, like you have to play those guys just because they're massive favorites. They are projected for 27 points. So if one of those 2 guys are in, I'm all the way in. If neither of them are in, then you're in this committee where it's kind of hard to pick from.
Pat, as someone who has covered the NFL for 3 decades, let's read the tea leaves here. I feel like if Tua does not start this game, Tua is not starting another game this season. And I understand you can say the thumb injury and all that, and it might be true. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, not speculating anything. But if I were to speculate, it's a thumb injury that occurred in a situation we did not see. They faced the Jets last week. Ryan Fitzpatrick played well enough. The Miami Dolphins never make the playoffs. They're absolutely in the playoff hunt this year. This is one of those games, just like last week, I believe it was against the Jets, that it would be a good spot for Tua to get opportunity to show how good he is. So if Ryan Fitzpatrick once again plays in one of those spots, then against more difficult competition, Fitz will be the quarterback. And his play probably deserves it at this point.
It's because Tua has not had any showcase matchups, really. He's had a lot of tough matchups, if I'm remembering correctly. And I will say the Dolphins have been very process-oriented. And because, the results would never have dictated benching Ryan Fitzpatrick. And even with the playoffs, very much within striking distance, maybe they're just so committed to this project that they will be starting Tua, even if they think Fitzpatrick gives them the better chance to win. But with 5 weeks left in the season, they are so close for the first time in so long. Just ignoring Adam Gase, not counting the Adam Gase season where they made the playoffs, because that actually wasn't that long ago. I don't know. I wouldn't make that sweeping of a statement on the Dolphins quarterbacks, but it is just a truly fascinating dynamic.
Also, Giovanni Bernard. The good news is he had 77% of the team's
Bernard.
The good news is he had 77% of the team's backfield touches. The bad news is it was 10 touches. So again, moving down the rankings as Pat beat me to my own punchline.
I'm not playing any of the. You can't play a single Cincinnati Bengal, and I don't care what your bench is like. I refuse to do it in this situation because you're just lucking into a situation like you got for T. Higgins last week, who was able to go 5 for 5 because 2 of his catches were both on 3rd and 18s. That's not actionable information. Okay.
I was just a Daigle too last week with Gio. They were giving guys, I think 1 or 2 guys I had never heard of got carries behind Giovanni Bernard last week, and one of them was not Samaje Perine, so I'm not really sure what's going on there. But they seem to have hard capped Gio's touches. All
right, we're on pace for our longest episode of the season, which is still remarkable to me because it's week 13. Let's move on. Jacksonville Jaguars, Minnesota Vikings. Vikings favored by 10 points. They're 5-6. A total of 52.5 in this game. Daigle, I feel like this game is well defined. Only question is Dalvin Cook's availability, the ankle injury. The injury seems far more serious when on the field last week, and all reports seem to be optimistic heading into this game.
Yes, optimistic. But what we are asking ourselves is, after saying that they could limit him for the rest of the year to keep him fresh, perhaps for a playoff appearance, is that truly what they're going to do? Are they going to get Alexander Madison more involved? I don't think so. And like Kamara's issues right now, when people complain or ask me about start or sit him, question is always start him. You start Dalvin Cook, you start Kamara. All we can do is wallow to one another about these players underperforming on their usage, but I dare you to have enough courage to bench them. I dare you. So it doesn't really matter. You're still starting him. And what makes Cousins frustrating in this offense is because when asked to throw, he's been amazing. 9 yards per attempt, 15 touchdowns, 4 picks since week 6. The last 2 weeks, though, that has only happened because the Vikings have shot themselves in the foot. 6 penalties, lost 2 fumbles in the first half against the Cowboys. And then this past week, that epically bad third quarter where Jeremy Chin had fumble 6s on back-to-back snaps. So will the Vikings put themselves in position to be forced to throw the ball again? Maybe, but that's kind of all we're asking with Kirk Cousins, because if so, he's been great.
Yeah, like the problem with Kirk is that the Jaguars defense might actually end up being the worst in the NFL for the final month. I mean, they are like in full-on expansion tank mode where everyone's hurt. The players who aren't hurt are terrible. They allow almost 8.5 yards per pass attempt. They're horrible on the ground. I guess the Kirk outlook could be enhanced just a little bit by we're not entirely sure how healthy Dalvin Cook is, because like the threat normally would be Dalvin is taking this game over. But yeah, I mean, this is a green light matchup for Kirk. I mean, this Jaguars pass defense might as well not even be on the field at this point. Like, it is like shockingly bad.
Yeah, I made Justin Jefferson the cover image for my preview column because, I mean, they're missing CJ Henderson, they're missing DJ Hayden, Sidney Jones is possibly playing through an Achilles injury, and like the way that their defense is set up, it's just like they leave their corners on an island and then pray, and that's okay if you have CJ Henderson, who's like a freak athlete, but that's not okay if you're running out like UDFAs out there. So Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, I know the usage is like typically not exactly where you want them, but like there are upside wide receiver 2 plays like at the very worst this week.
On the flip side, you're absolutely starting James Robinson, who, especially with Chris Thompson being out no matter what, gets 20 touches despite game script situations. And the Jaguars have actually been a little competitive at the start of games in recent weeks, which helps him. And Mike Glennon is probably the best quarterback that's played for the Jaguars this season. That is maybe ever since Blake Bortles, even pre-Blake Bortles, let's put it that way. Look, I get questions every week about James Robinson, to be honest, on Sunday morning, and I understand it. Because how could you on earth want to start a player that is attached to a team with 1 win this season at the running back position that is so attached to game script and so attached to offensive line blocking? But in this case, it doesn't matter. I don't want to open Pandora's box here. But as it stands now, I mean, James Robinson is what? A top 20 pick in fantasy drafts in 2021, which is a remarkable thing to say, if not even higher than that.
He's 4th in yards from scrimmage right now. I mean,
yeah.
I was gonna say probably higher than that, honestly. Yeah, I mean, if he can survive this offensive line, this quarterback play, this defense, these games single week, then why wouldn't he be able to survive with a better quarterback and a new head coach?
Right. Okay, let's move on. Las Vegas Raiders, New York Jets. Jets still winless. Raiders kind of played like they were winless last week, but they are 6-5. They are 8-point favorites on the road here. Hayden, Josh Jacobs is limited. I don't know how much information we have on that since they're on the West Coast. Nelson Aguilar was out of practice on Wednesday. I mean, again, the Raiders could get nothing going against an Atlanta Falcons defense that a lot of other teams has done well against. But I just kind of feel like the Raiders are that team this year where sometimes they have their best games, and especially against the Chiefs. They look great. The Bucs this year, right? Then you have other contests where they look puny and narrow and not explosive. Which one should and will happen this week against the Jets?
Well, I think last week with the Raiders, there was like 3 Derek Carr fumbles. So that was like pretty fluky. So I think we can kind of throw that game out the window, especially against the Jets. I mean, they're projected for 27.25 points this week. That's the 7th most on the slate. So somebody's scoring touchdowns. And I think as 7.5-point favorites, if Josh Jacobs is healthy, this is obviously the week to start him. He has a 42% touch share while leading. That drops down to 15% while trailing. They're huge favorites here. So Josh Jacobs is a must play. I'm kind of wondering what the heck's up with Darren Waller. He's averaging 6 yards per target this year. He's averaging like more than 20 yards less this year compared to last year. I mean, he's still the tight end 2 overall, but like where did the ceiling games go with him? It's kind of bizarre.
They're just spreading the ball out more, right? Like they're getting literally everyone involved that they can.
It's like if the efficiency at all costs, it's like they just will not they will not loosen the reins on Derek Carr whatsoever. You would think spreading the ball, I mean, that would almost lead to like a higher yards per catch if you make defenses have to respect more threats. But yeah, it has not worked that way. And I mean, he had 3 50-yard games, Darren Waller, I believe. I mean, he's averaging under 7 yards per catch. He's like a running back when it comes to like yards per catch. So that has been not cool. And my only analysis on this game is that if there was a team born to end the Jets' winless season, it would be the John Gruden Raiders, like after Thanksgiving, who have just been god awful every single year. So they could challenge accept this.
Pat, hypothetical for you. I know you love those with your rankings. Let's say Josh Jacobs does not play. Where does Devontae Booker slot this week?
I mean, it has to be top 20, doesn't it? I mean, because I'm just joking about it. I mean, with the game script still, 8-point favorites. And who's going to mix in behind him? Is Theo Riddick still on the 53-man roster? I mean, does Jalen Richard still exist? I haven't heard his name in like 6 or 7 weeks. But Devontae Booker would for sure be top 20 and maybe top 15.
Daigle, anyone worthwhile on the Jet side? I mean, Denzel Mims continues to win in the ways that Denzel Mims wins in terms of, tight coverage, but he's able to create and come down with these contested catches. Is that worthwhile against this Raiders defense that is not good?
I think so. Denzel Mims still running more routes, oddly enough, than Jameson Crowder, even though he's been back the last 3 or 4 games. And we've seen him now have at least 7 targets in every game since he was activated from injured reserve in all but one, and that was the Chiefs contest that got way out of the Jets' hands. The issue really is their offense and their play calling, which no one wants to fess up to, oddly enough. Adam Gase did take over play calling, but told media he did not, and it's a collaborative effort moving forward for competitive disadvantage. And, of course, Gase, he called plays, and they scored 9 points, whereas they scored 27 and 28 points with Dow Loggins and Joe Flacco commanding the offense. So it's just that organization, man. It's wild. It's wild.
I wish I brought that clip to show, and I talked about it on the game-by-game recap show, but he said that we get together before the drive starts and call the first 3 plays, which on its head, that is the style of calling an offense is ludicrous, because then it does not matter what the defense puts out there. You're just going to do what you do. Weird. There's no situational football there. And then the reporter, because Gase seemed to not even consider this, asks, well, what if the drive goes more than 3 plays, which has only happened about 10 times this season. And he didn't really have an answer. So wonderful job.
I'll tell you what
better liars.
Yeah, I'll tell you what the tell is if Adam Gase is the play caller or not. If Frank Gore is getting 20 early down touches again. He had 20 early down touches, first and second down, 20, Frank Gore.
Let's now go to the Cleveland Browns and the Tennessee Titans. Gentlemen, I am pumped for this game. A total of 53.5. The Browns are 8-3. We know the Titans are also 8-3. And despite both teams having the same record, the Titans are 6-point favorites in this game. Hayden, these teams are, I think, identical in many ways, namely running backs who can be just absolute hammers and closers and dominate in the fourth quarters. We know that both offenses rely on play-action quarterbacks. However, one of those teams has Baker Mayfield to Jarvis Landry. The other quarterback is Ryan Tannehill to A.J. Brown and Corey Davis. Is that worth 6 points here?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting Myles Garrett back, so I think that's like the one thing that the Titans don't have because they can't rush the passer at all. I mean, both of these secondaries are absolutely obliterated by injuries. Denzel Ward, Adoree Jackson hasn't played. There's safeties missing. There's backup corners missing. So this is a very interesting game because I think both of these teams can pass the ball if they choose to do so. But when you have Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb, what are you going to do here? So I can see this game going way over in like a potential shootout game if they pass the ball a little bit or if we get some monster runs, which both of these running backs are capable of doing. You also can see kind of a little bit of a slugfest where it's just like Nick Chubb versus Derrick Henry and just like all in on the run game. Either way, this is going to be one of the best games of the week.
What's funny is that we know how these two offenses want to operate, but Vegas and Sharp Money still come in to bet this game to make it the highest total of the weekend and also increase the Titans team total from 28 to 30, with the Browns team total rising a point in that span as well. So we're assuming there are going to be points all over here. Browns defense, despite perhaps getting Ward and Garrett back. Remember, they were still a pass funnel. They were getting sacks, but teams were still attacking them with ease through the air. So you would think it's still going to be a terrific game for Ryan Tannehill and A.J. Brown and perhaps even Corey Davis, even if they continue leaning on Derrick Henry, which is what we should expect them to do. 29 touches in back-to-back games now. It is what I'm hearing, hashtag the Hember, apparently as well. So this entire offense is poised to explode in this game.
I mean, Josh, you said they're identical teams, and they are very close. But it's hard to believe, but there is a humongous difference between Ryan Tannehill and a quarterback. Like, I would never thought I'd be saying this 2 years ago, but Ryan Tannehill just puts Baker Mayfield to shame. And that probably does explain the spread. Because, I mean, maybe some of it's recency bias too, with Baker Mayfield just putting horrid performances on film over the past month. And thank God this game is not in Cleveland, where apparently they now only have like these weird Midwestern awful vortex storms. But I think the spread really does just come down to the gulf between Ryan Tannehill and Baker Mayfield.
So if I'm reading the room correctly here, a lot of people here are on the side of the Titans, which, so is Vegas, so the desert. I understand. What if I told you that other than the quarterback situation, the biggest gulf in talent is offensive line, and that the Browns' offensive line is significantly better than the Titans' offensive line, and that Titans' offensive line with 2 backup tackles has to go up against Myles Garrett? That could be something that we've also seen decide games, and that wouldn't surprise me at all if that is the great differentiator in this contest as well.
Yeah, this is going to be a close game. I want to shout out Daigle here for being on the Jarvis Landry train. The last month or so, weather was just like basically you can throw out all of those games. And last week, Jarvis Landry went berserk. And I think that you kind of have to go back to him as like a wide receiver 2-3. You still like the floor can bottom out if the Browns just pass the ball like 25 times. But Jarvis Landry looked pretty good last week, and he has all of the opportunity because none of the guys behind him are doing anything.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, Hayden. The drastic injury at safety is significant for the Browns, where Ronnie Harrison and then the drop off to Carl Joseph, who's like one of the worst safeties in the NFL right now. We could see once again some rare A.J. Brown plays being made. All right, 4 o'clock slate now. Let's go to the Los Angeles Rams, Arizona Cardinals, total of 48.5 in this game. The 7-4 Rams are 3-point favorites on the road here. Pat and I talked about in the recap show that Kyler not running greatly lowers the ceiling, I should say, and the floor of this Cardinals offense. Daigle, the last 2 games, Kyler Murray has had just 45 rushing yards combined. In the previous 2 before then, 167 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. Significant.
5 carries in each of his last 2 games, as well as 4 runs for -1 yards on zone reads in that span, because, according to him, defenders have now been told to only play the running back in RPOs. They don't play him whatsoever and force him to hand the ball off. The past month now, we've seen him blitzed on 40% of his dropbacks, whereas through Arizona's first 7 games, he was blitzed in only 17%. So not only is his shoulder perhaps an issue, not only is he being forced to hand the ball to the running back now, but also he's getting attacked more and forced to make quick decisions. So they're just playing him differently, honestly. And that, of course, has been an issue. And now you get this Joker defense where they move Jalen Ramsey around, who was full go at Wednesday's practice after being limited on Sunday. Aaron Donald coming at him, no matter how many defenders they send at him. I'm really worried about the Cardinals offense in this spot.
Yeah, I mean, Kyler Murray appeared confused by some of the Patriots' blitz packages last week, too. It's just kind of a perfect storm with what the defense was throwing at him and seemingly the limitations because they claimed it wasn't his shoulder, but I mean, he was just much less aggressive, both as a runner and it seemed like he was backpedaling more as a passer, which he did a lot as a rookie and led to a lot of his worst passing games. And it's kind of the worst of both worlds. I think John was really hitting on. They were converging with the health issues and how the defenses are now approaching him differently. And all that being said, I still kept him in the top 5 at quarterback. I mean, he'll be a week healthier, and I just think the Cardinals know. I mean, they can't really compete without the Kyler rushing, and they're going to have to get them unless he just truly debilitated. I mean, I don't think he'd be out there if they were that worried, though. And I think they have to have this Kyler rushing, and that's one way to neutralize. I mean, your number 1 receiver getting locked down and Aaron Donald wrecking the middle of your offense is you got to have the scrambles. So despite the warning signs, I couldn't fade him out of the top 5.
We've seen this before, though, haven't we, Hayden? I mean, we didn't know what we were going to get with Kyler Murray as a rookie in those first 2 games, probably because he was still getting used to the speed and maybe was a bit tentative in this area. He just chose not to run. So it's not like this is this whole new wave that we haven't seen. And to Pat's point, we don't know if he's more healthy this week than he has been the last 2 weeks, but no matter what they say, they're not telling the truth because it's clear on the field that it's just not part of the game, which it is one of the most indefensible plays in the NFL this season. And without it, this team truly is throws to DeAndre Hopkins with no special sauce to it. And that's terrifying against this Rams defense, which, yes, has those 2 headliners, but is also extremely well coached and has given a lot of other teams issues.
Yeah, when I watched last game, I'm not sure if I saw a single designed run for Kyler Murray, and you're used to seeing 4 or 5 of those, especially at the goal line. And I think what I'm kind of leaning towards is where do we rank Kenyon Drake? Because like Daigle said, if they're selling out to stop the run or Kyler running, then Kenyon Drake's gonna be running wide open through holes. And we saw that last week. He had 30.5 expected PPR points because he had all these inside the 10 carries. And that was the big difference between Kyler Murray in the first half of the year and Kenyon Drake in the first half of the year is when they were getting down to the goal line, Kyler Murray kept keeping the ball himself. But if we're not going to see that anymore, I think that Kenyon Drake has a much higher chance of scoring touchdowns. And I think Kenyon Drake is starting to get back into the RB1 territory. This is a very tough matchup, but I think for the rest of the season, if Kyler Murray isn't running as much as we were accustomed to seeing, I think that is going to really help Kenyon Drake.
It's not only that, but whether it's the shoulder or the increased rate of blitzes he's facing, the fact is Drake has seen 9 targets the past 2 weeks, whereas he totaled 11 to that point throughout the season. So he's getting more usage in the passing game now, perhaps because Murray's forced to use him now. But whatever the case, if that is what happens moving forward, then yes, we should continue to increase Drake up our rankings.
Let's look at the Rams offense because I think, Pat, this is the question we have to ask ourselves every single week with the Los Angeles Rams. Does the opposing defense have, 1, the coaching, and 2, the talent to freak Jared Goff in the pocket and confuse him? If yes, he gets confused and the offense sucks. And period. That's it. That's the end of the story. This Cardinals team without Chandler Jones somehow is the 12th ranked passing defense, the 14th ranked rushing defense. That's top half of the NFL in each category. But I don't know if it's that good enough to take advantage of the situation that Jared Goff and this offensive line is in right now, where we just saw him have one of the worst performances of his career last week.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't sure where you were going with that with the Cardinals, but you made the point I wanted to make, and that the Cardinals are just holding up shockingly well, especially against the pass. And with Patrick Peterson not even playing well, really, and Robert Woods had a lot of historic success against Patrick Peterson. I saw on the Twitter machine this week, but yeah, I mean, the Cardinals, I didn't quite understand how they were doing it even when they had Chandler Jones. And when they lost Chandler Jones, I'm like, all right, this is a defense that's going to start breaking, and it just has not happened. They continue to overachieve, and I just don't know what it means for Jared Goff, who it seems like every week we're seeing something new from Jared, and I just don't know how to forecast how this matchup is going to go for Jared Goff. If they'll be able to generate enough pressure, because hopefully John or Hayden has some good analysis, because I just genuinely do not know what to expect from Jared Goff this week.
I have some takes here. I watched the games from last year, and I looked at what the Cardinals are doing on defense this year. Lots of cover one, lots of man coverage. Patrick Peterson, like you said, is not playing nearly as good as he was previously. That's why Robert Woods had 18 targets and 12 targets last year. I think he's going to roast Patrick Peterson again. I have him as a wide receiver 1. He's been balling out recently. His usage is way up. The Rams are passing more. They're running at a fast pace. Jared Goff had 300 yards and 2 touchdowns in each of his games last year. I think the reason for that is because the Cardinals can't create pressure right now, and they're playing a lot of man coverage that's really easy to diagnose for Jared Goff and Sean McVay. And I think the Rams just have better receivers than the Cardinals have corners. So I think that the Rams passing offense, specifically with Robert Woods, should have a pretty good game this week.
That makes sense. I do wonder, since the scheme is a little different at least, if Goff's results from last year against the Cardinals you can throw out the window. But I will say he did average 50 pass attempts in 3 games prior to last week. whenever the play calling and volume was reduced against the Niners. So at least we can assume the volume will be there in this matchup.
Clip that one, Producer Steven. That was a great little conversation you guys had. Congratulations. You made my job easy. All right, let's now go. And by the way, we talked about Cam Akers in a previous episode this week, so hopefully you listened to that. I'm with Daigle, where Darrell Henderson, because of his quad injury, just looks far less explosive, even though at times he looked like a really nicely explosive running back in this league. That is not the case anymore. All right, let's move on. New York Giants, Seattle Seahawks. 46.5 total. Seahawks, who are 8-3 this season, are 10-point favorites at home, and this is why. Daniel Jones has a hamstring injury. Daniel Jones might not play. Daniel Jones has looked a little bit better at times, and I actually think last week he was starting to have one of his better performances as a professional. Meanwhile, despite all of this, Pat, in half PPR scoring, here are Wayne Gallman's point totals over the last 5 games. 13.9. 12.7, 14.2, 18.5, and 16.6. That's running back one territory. Do you trust the Wayne Gallman skills enough, talent enough, to start him attached to Colt McCoy against the Seattle Seahawks defense?
So the whole podcast about vomited last week when I said it was Yeezin, and it just kept on rolling.
I just think we need to work on the branding a little bit.
Jokes.
Like the problem for this, so I have him in the top 24, just based on because I think it's gonna be one of those games where he's getting touches no matter what, kind of regardless of the game script, game flow, because the Giants just have no chance. I mean, Colt McCoy basically has a pea shooter. Like this is just a horrible development for the Giants, and Seahawks' defense has been playing better over the past 3 or 4 weeks, so it probably would have been kind of lights out for Daniel Jones too. But I just don't see like how the New York Giants could possibly keep up the Seattle Seahawks with Colt McCoy. I understand. And we're going to get a ton of like gross Sterling Shepard, endless checkdowns, and a matchup where maybe Darius Slayton a month ago would have been like, oh, this is like the wide receiver top 30 moment for Darius Slayton. I could barely get him in the top 50 this week. That might be too pessimistic, but to me, Darius Slayton and Colt McCoy just seem like a match made in hell, basically. And I just don't know how that's going to happen for Darius Slayton in a game where it should have happened.
By the way, Pat, the true fans of this show, they will side with me with this. Where you make fun of me for talking about Henry Ruggs every single week. I mean, I don't think the number of mentions even touches your mentions of Darius Slayton this season.
Hey, Darius Slayton at least has some fantasy points, so that's good. I like players who occasionally score fantasy points once every 5 or 6 weeks. Darius Slayton's just out there blowing up for 4 catches.
Daigle, let me ask you more about Wayne Gallman, because this is important. I mean, this is the final week. It can get someone a 1 or 2 seed and a bye in the fantasy playoffs. We've talked about Seattle's defense this year being really bad, among the league worst. I would argue that is not a case against the run. I mean, you have Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright, Poona Ford, and now you have this more healthy X factor in Jamal Williams just flying around the box. And Wayne Gallman has practically zero passing down value, receiving work. So unless he's going to get it done near the goal line or running the football and racking up yards, or Jason Garrett thinks like the best avenue for beating the Seahawks is 20 touches, which it's possible Jason Garrett believes that, then I can't start Wayne Gallman this week in this matchup.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty confident in Wayne Gallman, honestly. Like,
there we go.
To
That's why I asked.
To your point, like Seattle actually has been playing better defense. Now, it always helps whenever you get easier matchups like Carson Wentz on Monday night, who wasn't even going to threaten to move the ball at all, no matter how many chances they gave him. But we've seen now Gallman's touches increase in every game, in every start for Devontae Freeman, 13, 15, 19, and then a season high, 27 last week. Of course, he's living off the one stat we can't predict every week, touchdowns, right? Everyone cites that, but that's the one number that we have no idea if it's going to happen or not. But if he continues seeing 27 to 30 touches, this continues, I will gladly start him. Even with Colt McCoy, he got 5 targets this past game. Sure, I'm going to tout David Montgomery. I'll tout Wayne Gallman. Why not?
All right. So, Daigle, good. I know you're a bit of a nomad right now, but we haven't made a bet with each other lately. So, look, over the last 5 games, Wayne Gallman in half-point PPRs averaged 15 fantasy points. Is that a fair over-under, or would you rather have it like 13?
I mean, you said 15. We can go 15. That's fine. 15.
Okay.
That's fine.
So
do 14-5.
14-5.
14-5. I will go with the under here this week on Wayne Gallman. He's in the bus column this week, which is on
Virtual
a roll,
shake.
I might add. There we go.
Virtual shake. I'm going over.
Hayden, anything on this game?
Yeah, the Seahawks are allowing the third fewest carries per game and the second most receptions to running backs this year because of game script. So my question is Wayne Gallman going to be there on third downs? Because last week, Dion Lewis was that guy.
Yep.
So that's the thing that I'm trying to weigh, because I think you're going to get 10 early, first half rushes for Wayne Gallman, but are you going to get the dump offs in the second half of the game? I'm a little worried that those are going to go to Dion Lewis. So while I respect the Wayne Gallman trutherism, I'm dropping him down a little bit just because I'm a little nervous about the game script here.
Trutherism means I think the player's good. That's not the case at all.
Well, workload trutherism.
Okay, that's fair. That's a whole new demographic, by the way. Workload trutherism. Having said that, I don't even know. Third down, of course, means the whole game. It doesn't matter about game script. But I don't even have confidence the Seahawks will put up or win or get up by 10 plus points, because what now is basically take Russ out of the game. 25 running back carries 23 running back carries this past week, as they continue to want to not let Russ cook, as Pete Carroll said himself. They need a combined 50 pass attempts and running back carries in order to win the game. Just like Lombardi said, Carroll didn't even watch him coach 100 years ago. So I just even think this offense is one outside of the players we know about, we're even excited about anymore, because they're not even looking to move the ball anymore.
Wow, really? That's man, I know it's Pete Carroll, but and I just want to say the Giesen is about protecting Colt McCoy.
Rebrand, Pat. Week 14, we need a whole rebrand.
It's about protecting Colt McCoy, is why I'm confident in the RB2 projection.
All right.
God, I keep forgetting that Colt McCoy is actually the quarterback in this game as well. Everything happens so quickly. Wayne Gallman's still scoring more than 14.5.
Hey, Josh, can I get something in real quick? Because we talked about the Seahawks too much here. This is a Tyler Lockett game, just the way that the Giants play cover 3, lots of zone underneath. DK Metcalf is the man beater on one-on-one coverage. He's going to get some James Bradbury, but in the zone defense, give me Tyler Lockett. That's your all-22 take right there.
Philadelphia and Green Bay, 46.5 total in this one. Green Bay's 8-3 and 8.5 point favorites in this game. Look, kind of like what we just talked about, the Packers defense at times has been one we wanted to attack, one we thought we could get points against. I'm not sure you can say that about this Philadelphia offense, Pat, because just the state of it at the moment. I mean, Miles Sanders has just been on the wrong side of luck in previous weeks. Like week 10, he turned 17 touches into 95 yards. But Boston Scott and Corey Clement on 4 combined touches found 2 touchdowns. Week 11, he had 81 yards and 19 touches. And then last week, the floor fell out from under Miles Sanders for 8 touches on 22 yards and a 2-point conversion. Again, I don't think the Packers defense is well coached, but I think that the combination of Zadarius Smith, Preston Smith, Kenny Clark, and Rashawn Gary could give this Eagles offensive line, which is a complete disaster, just absolute fits, and have a repeat of what we saw on Monday.
I mean, the Packers defense is not well coached, but it has been stabilizing, and at least in the matchups where they should play well, they played very well against the Bears, except for letting David Montgomery get loose and giving us the opportunity to chase points with David Montgomery. But I mean, this has been a run defense we haven't been scared of all year. But the Eagles do not like Miles Sanders as much as fantasy players do. And since returning from his knee injury in half PPR, he's finished as the RB53, the RB26, and the RB24. And part of that is about the offensive environment. There aren't drives to finish near the goal line, so how is he ever going to get touchdowns? But part of it is just the usage. They dial off him. It seems like every game, like a force field kind of comes up between him and getting more work after he gets up around 14 or 15 touches. I think it's surely coincidence, but they just seem like they have like a hard cap on his usage, and they are just not fans of Miles Sanders right now, and especially since coming back from his knee injury. And this is a matchup where normally, Miles Sanders, I think, should be in the top 10 or 12, but I actually faded him to the middle of the RB2 pack this week. And maybe it's just like I'm not showing enough patience, but I think we've given Miles Sanders enough chances in the top 12.
The most recent workload between these two. Sanders, 50% of the backfield touches against Seattle. Boston Scott, 44%. Was definitely concerning. But it is a good matchup. Like you said, Pat, third most fantasy points per game allowed to running backs by the Packers and the fifth most receptions. So if there's ever a spot you should start Sanders as an RB2, it would be this one.
My issue right now, Miles Sanders is like he relies on athleticism because his vision is not that great between the tackles. And he's dropped 8 out of 27 catchable targets this year. 8 out of 27. That's why Boston Scott's playing more. They don't view Miles Sanders as a bell cow. They tried it late last year, and that was great for like RB1 status down the stretch. But then they re-signed Jordan Howard, who we haven't seen, but that kind of tells me that they're maybe trying to phase out Miles Sanders if they ever activate Jordan Howard. They're playing Corey Clement a little bit. They're playing Boston Scott a ton. So I think the bell cow days for Miles Sanders are over. And I think that he's kind of proven that he's not that type of guy. He's just been way too unreliable in too many of these situations. So I think that the Eagles are making the right decision by not playing Miles Sanders that much.
Hayden, Zach Ertz, I believe, was activated. Zach Ertz was a top 4 tight end pick for a lot of fantasy players out there. Fantasy managers be like, But Dallas Goedert has looked fantastic, right? So what does the reemergence, if we can count it as that, of Zach Ertz do for Dallas Goedert and this Philadelphia offense? Can you play him immediately?
No, I think Zach Ertz just goes into the Dick Rod role where he's like kind of like a tight end too, and and I think Dallas Goedert is like locked in as like a top 6, top 7, top 8 tight end, and I think Dallas Goedert's like the only guy that's like beating man coverage and is like the most reliable option for Carson Wentz right now because their receivers aren't doing anything. And I think that Zach Ertz doesn't have the contract, and I think they're just trying to phase him out of the offense.
Pat, would you like to dig yourself in a hole?
I'm too disciplined of a comedian. I just want to make the best jokes, so I never get in trouble for any of my jokes. Zach Ertz, he's in the top 20, and that's about as far as I'm willing to go. I have like the top
nothing.
The tight end 17 or 18 basically this week, and I've got Goddard in the top 5 still. Trying to keep the show on the rails, folks.
I would play Jordan Akins over Zach Ertz. I would play definitely Kyle Rudolph over Zach Ertz if Irv Smith is out. Zach Ertz averaged 7.5 targets per game. Doesn't matter whenever you're getting 4 catches for 30 yards per game. So who cares?
We haven't said a word about the Packers offense. Is it necessary to? I mean, we know exactly who's getting the football. We know that they can score points. We know they're really good. Anything?
Oh, Hayden, let me ask you from the usage model. Do you have a lean on what downs Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones are being used right now? Because it's clearly become more of a timeshare since Aaron Jones returned from injury. I just don't know if there's a rhyme or reason to it.
I don't think there is. I think there's maybe a little bit the calf injury. They're kind of saving him up because the Packers they're ready for the playoffs at this point. I think the biggest split is with Devontae Adams versus without Devontae Adams, because with Devontae Adams, he's like averaging like 16 expected fantasy points, which is still really good. And Aaron Jones usually beats expectations. But before, when Devontae Adams was sidelined, he was averaging 24 expected fantasy points per game. That's when he was like a must-play top 1 or top 2. I think you kind of have to slide him down a little bit. I mean, he's still an RB1 every week, but I think the spiked weeks and the high floors a little bit, you're kind of playing with fire just because they're using Jamal Williams more, and Devontae Adams is the guy that's rolling right now.
All right, we have 5 games left. We've already crossed the hour mark, and they're actually 5 pretty good games. So I don't know how this is going to play out, but let's keep it rolling. The New England Patriots and the Los Angeles Chargers are next. The Patriots are 1-point favorites on the road. They are 5-6. Daigle, the Chargers have failed to cover the point spread in 5 straight games. That's the longest streak in the NFL. Again, the Patriots just 1-point favorites here. And I think my biggest question in order for the Patriots to win this game is, do Steve and Bill Belichick we know they have the coaching, but do they have the talent to match that coaching to slow down Justin Herbert?
Yes, I would think so. We've seen the past 2 games, teams like Kyler just send more defenders at Justin Herbert, forcing him to check down. That, of course, helped Austin Eckler have a 33% target share in his first game back from injury, 25 of 30 RB touches. And if Belichick's going to follow that path, blitzing defenders like the last 2 teams against Herbert, then of course we should expect that again for Eckler and less for Mike Williams. Herbert has averaged 50.5 pass attempts the past 2 games, but per Sharp Football's Rich Rebar, only 3 rookie quarterbacks ever in Belichick's coaching career have eclipsed 20 fantasy points. He just has the formula to make sure young passers cannot get past him. So it's an interesting mark. We know that the Chargers will be vastly outcoached in this game. Having said that, will you find someone to start over, better to start over Herbert against the Patriots defense allowing the most yards per attempt through the air? Probably not. So you're still trusting him for fantasy.
You hit on a point there with the coaching, because the Cardinals had no business losing last week's game to the Patriots, and it was really, honestly, Cliff Kingsbury just gave the game away with this horrible in-game management. And we know that one person who can hold Cliff Kingsbury's beer there is Anthony Lynn, and it's somehow worse in-game management. But and John, but you hit on another point. Like Justin Herbert, what makes him like an elite quarterback already is that even in his bad games, I mean, he usually has good fantasy days. He had 316 yards last week in what was not a good performance. So I think maybe both things could be true. The Patriots can out brain power the Chargers, but Justin Herbert can still deliver a top 6 or 7 day. Quarterback, by the way, is not that deep this year. Something really just stood out. I mean, we got guys like Kirk Cousins on the QB 1-2 periphery, and that should not be happening right now. And quarterbacks is not very deep.
Yeah, the Chargers have to overcome the pace problem because the Patriots are just so slow. At least the Chargers are kind of helping themselves. I think they're 4th in pace and 6th in neutral pass rate over the last month. And I think Austin Eckler's return is going to really help Justin Herbert, because I think the Chargers are probably going to pass the ball more than they were with freaking Kalen Ballage. And we saw Austin Eckler go nuts after yards after the catch, exactly what he was doing last year. So I think that Eckler's return will help Justin Herbert long term. This game, I'm not expecting a ceiling game just because the slow pace, and this could get a weird game just all the way around. But I think long term, I think Justin Herbert with Austin Eckler is going to be really something to watch on the stretch.
Yeah, Austin Eckler has already found himself in tried and true territory. But what if Kalen Ballage does return in this game? Does that take away anything, Daigle? I don't think it would. I mean, we would project Kalen Ballage for less than 10 touches easily in this contest.
I would hope it doesn't change anything, but You're asking me to step inside the mind and lend, and I just cannot do that.
Well, I mean, Joshua Kelly is the threat because he keeps coming in at the goal line. So that's Eckler's only thing I can say bad about Eckler right now, unless his hamstring reappears, is Joshua Kelly keeps getting subbed in on these short yardage downs. And I think going back to last year, Eckler kept fumbling at the goal line and he wasn't converting them as much. So I think Joshua Kelly's on a big thing.
Yeah, Kelly has one skill, and it's to leap over the pile at the 1 yard line right now, and that's
he
what
is
he
good
can
at
do.
that.
On the Patriots side of this, quickly, and then we'll move on. I think Joey Bosa, who last week had one of the best performances of any defensive player in the NFL all season long. I believe Isaiah Wynn might be out again at left tackle for the Patriots.
IR, yeah.
I mean, that could be just a killer for Joey Bosa, who shut down all of the design runs last week against Josh Allen. He could do that once again this week with Cam Newton and potentially Damian Harris as well.
The challenging matchup for Taysom Newton. And I got to say, speaking to Hayden's point about pace in the Patriots, they have faced the fewest pass attempts in the NFL this year, only 316. So hopefully our Lord and Savior, Justin Herbert, can still get some volume. But, yeah, it could be a challenge.
James White also did punch in 2 goal line touchdowns, but Damian Harris encouragingly still ran just 1 fewer route than White, which he basically took on Rex Burkhead's receiving role, which was more than he was getting previous. I think that's actually a good sign for Harris in this game if you're forced to start him, because we know also he's still going to lead this backfield and carry.
Yeah, I just think so much of that Patriots rushing production this year has been on that left side that, 1, the injury, and 2, Joey Bosa just being a freak could limit that to what we've seen at other points this year. But that's just what my eyes tell me, and certainly not what the analytics tell me. All right, let's now go to Sunday Night Football. Denver Broncos, Kansas City Chiefs. On a primetime game against a team that is 4-7, the Chiefs are 14-point favorites here at home, a total of 50.5 in this game. And guess what? The Broncos have quarterbacks this week. Pat, the Chiefs have won 10 straight games against the Drew Lock-led Denver Broncos. Well, he hasn't played all 10 of those, but you get what I'm saying. And the Chiefs have also covered the spread in 9 of those games. Again, a 14-point spread in this one. Got to put your money on the Chiefs in this one.
I believe so, and hopefully we can put our money on the Chiefs' passing offense. Where the last game they didn't go totally nuts as a passing attack was against the Broncos, who they killed, and it was in bad weather, and it's because they kept getting non-offensive touchdowns. And so that's just my only question: will the Chiefs keep up this passing at all costs, like leaving the run game basically in the dustbin? Because that was not the formula the first time against the Broncos, but thankfully it's not a repeatable formula. So I'm thinking we will still get the Chiefs passing theatrics this week, and that you can't look to their earlier season stats against the Broncos as predictive for this game. Moving on to Monday afternoon football. I'm Josh, and sorry.
I mean, imagine betting against Patrick Mahomes for MVP. Like, I couldn't believe it. I was getting clowned because I said I bet Patrick Mahomes plus 400 at the beginning of the year. The dude is just playing so much better than everyone else. It's like, it's unbelievable. Like, he's making unbelievable throws. They're passing at the second highest rate in the league. That's not going anywhere. They have Sammy Watkins back. The Broncos just placed Bryce Callahan, their corner, on injured reserve. I mean, the Chiefs offense is just really rolling right now. And
you're going to see the difference in the best quarterback in the NFL versus one who's turnover prone in this one. I mean, the Chiefs have converted a league high 50.7% of their third down plays this season. That's best, once again. And Denver is at 36%, which is 30th in the NFL. Meanwhile, the Broncos have constantly turned the football over this season. 12 straight games they have a turnover. And those short fields, just imagine what Patrick Mahomes is going to do. And Daigle, hey, maybe we can get a short yardage touchdown for CEH.
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me about Melvin Gordon. You pivoted to the Broncos offense. It's like, no, we can't, actually.
No.
Jerry Jeudy will continue living off prayer yards, but it doesn't matter when Drew Lock is throwing them. So for the Chiefs offense, it has been a pivot in approach the past month. They now lead the league in pass play rate in that span, as well as pass play rate with a lead, which is very important because now they're building a lead with Patrick Mahomes and then telling Patrick Mahomes to go out and make it further of a lead. So we know the Broncos, as Hayden just mentioned, Bryce Callahan to injured reserve, still lacking a pass rush. We know that they won't stop them. The only way they stop them is they don't keep their foot on the gas and then perhaps give the ball to Edwards-Helaire and Le'Veon Bell in garbage time, and the Broncos backdoor this as they have done a few games with Drew Lock over the past month when he's been healthy. Other than that, though, an outright win, it's the Chiefs, and it's not even close.
Yeah. All right.
Hey, hold real quick. Where do you have CEH this week, Rotopat? I'm always it's tough because he has a way higher ceiling than these other RB2s, but the floor is a little lower.
I had him originally RB 25, which by far the lowest I had him all season. I'm like, this is too low. This is a bit ridiculous. And with this, the 14-point favorite, I moved him up to RB or 20 or 21. But it's just, if he's not getting fantasy points over the stretch of opponents they just played the past month, when is it going to happen? They haven't been using him, against lots of really bad teams, games with lots of, run, game script that screams for runs. And this is another one of those weeks, but the upside is still there in this offense for that kind of pass catching back. But he's another guy kind of like Miles Sanders this week where I'm like, I've got to lower CEH's rankings baseline basically because it just hasn't been happening.
Also quickly, you don't need me to tell you to start Tyreek Hill, obviously, but I will say he used to be fluky performances in that few targets like A.J. Brown, such a talented player, he turned them upfield, so it didn't matter. But the past 3 games, jamming him targets, over 30% target share, double-digit targets. They have a game script weekly where they give the ball to their MVP and just tell him to throw targets only to the fastest receiver in the league. And it's obviously been amazing for fantasy. So expect that to continue to happen.
Monday Night Football in the afternoon. Washington goes to Pittsburgh Steelers, who just played. They were just on my television, and it was abysmal. 43.5 total in this game. Steelers are 8.5-point favorites. They are undefeated. I think it's only the Bills basically stand in their way to a 16-0 record. And again, that's a conversation that seemingly does not exist right now. And I think that Hayden kind of puts in perspective what Pittsburgh is showing right now. It's odd. They were never going to lose against this Ravens team. But they just left so many plays on the field. Deontay Johnson had one of his moments where I think he had it was 13 targets or something, or 9 targets, and dropped 4 or 5 passes, and he's open, yet he screws himself up. And Chase Claypool had passes that were deflected out of his hands. Anyways, the Steelers team, it doesn't make sense, yet they are still undefeated. And I don't know what else to say about this matchup.
Yeah, please don't ask me about Deontay Johnson because I'm still very conflicted on whether he's actually good or not. Of course, in fantasy, it doesn't matter. He gets peppered, so you got to start him. But yeah, I mean, the Washington's good up front. Their secondary is not very good, so they are vulnerable to big plays. So I mean, you know who to start here. The real question is Big Ben like he never misses throws by like 5 yards, but his like pinpoint accuracy seems off right now, which is kind of a problem long term for the playoffs. But I mean, this could be a little bit of a slugfest against two pretty good teams on defense, and their offenses are okay at best right now.
The good news, even if it's a slugfest, we know what the Steelers are going to do. Like yesterday, they had 51 attempts to 19 running back carries. The past month, they have 188 pass attempts to 84 carries, a 69% pass play rate. They're not even trying to run the ball anymore, which is great because their red zone backs have become Chase Claypool, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Deontay Johnson. That's all they need. So I'm not even worried about the running backs here, especially if James Conner does get to turn around for Monday night.
We don't know. James Conner is still on the coronavirus list, and Steelers not a fun watch. But Josh, the remaining schedule is the football team, the Bills, the Bengals, Colts, and Browns. I would be shocked if the Steelers did not play down to at least one of those opponents and finish. I'm going to say 14-2 for the Pittsburgh Steelers with their final record.
Could it happen this week, Pat? And we always need to ask, unless things have changed, which they kind of have in the last few weeks with Washington's side. We know you're playing Terry McLaurin, but there was that 3 or 4 game stretch when Washington was in an extreme negative game script, which if they lose by 8-9 points in this game, it should be negative game script. That J.D. McKissick is fantasy viable, which then made Antonio Gibson less fantasy viable. But now, Antonio Gibson, God, if only we talked about him in May, would end up this season as a top 12 running back this season. And he's doing just that, Pat. So what's your view on both those backs?
I have Antonio Gibson in the top 6 or 7, and Hayden should probably talk about the hostile takeover basically of the Washington. Because is the passing game, is the J.D. McKissick thing dying? Can you just tell me this? Just tell me this, even if it's not true. Just tell me that it is.
On Thanksgiving, Antonio Gibson ran 19 routes. J.D. McKissick ran 12, and their targets were 7-2. I think that they're going to use Antonio Gibson as more of a 3-down player down the stretch because that's what he kind of profiled like as a prospect. And if you're trying to make the playoffs, we think that Antonio Gibson offers way more juice. And even just not for this year, just do you have a guy that is a 3-down back a la David Johnson, like Josh Norris was mentioning back in February? And I think they're going to give him the rock all the time, and that he's earned RB1 status right now.
Also on Thanksgiving, Gibson had 64% of the backfield touches. J.D. McKissick had a season-low 8%. I don't think this guarantees if the Steelers build a lead that Gibson is on the field as the every down player, but the fact he had 3 third-down touches on Thanksgiving and none through the first half of the season tells me that they're at least warming up to it slightly more. So he is the back to target, in my opinion, definitely as an RB1 moving forward.
I wouldn't play J.D. McKissick, just straight up. PPR, I don't care. I'm not playing him anymore.
It's fine.
Yeah. God, for some reason, I just got this feeling inside of me that Pittsburgh's just going to blow out Washington this game. And I
thought you were saying lose, which that's how I always feel about the Steelers. The Steelers, this is going to be the week the Steelers lose.
I mean, the Washington rolled the Cowboys, so we have to throw that out the window. It's the Cowboys. It doesn't matter. So.
Right.
If this game were in Washington, I think the upset would be firmly in play. I mean, the Steelers, barely practice. They're playing their second game, and the second game in 3 days. I think. I mean, I'm not good at the math, but I think something like that. But yeah, the game's in Pittsburgh. The Steelers will figure out a way to go to 12.
Also, Benny Snell producing 33 receiving yards against the Ravens when he entered the game with 22 receiving yards was quite a development in that contest as well. All right, 2 more games. We're going long. Buffalo Bills, San Francisco 49ers. Bills, 8-3 this year. Just, and I mean just, 1-point favorites on the road. A total of 48 in this game. Hayden, we're coming off one of the best coaching performances of the year. Typically, we say that about Kyle Shanahan, but it was Robert Saleh. Robert Saleh just confused. Jared Goff to the utmost degree. We've seen Josh Allen have moments where he's confused, but I think that the major difference between the two is that when there is that confusion, Josh Allen can push the pedal to the floor and use his athleticism and create plays out of nothing. So I think the Bills cover that 1-point spread here in this game.
This game's interesting. I think the 49ers are not messing around anymore. They got healthier, and I'm a little worried that they don't have their slot corner and their backup slot corner right now. But outside of that, they're getting healthier, and Robert Saleh's like a huge difference maker. He should be a head coach next year. And Nick Mullins is playing well enough, and they're getting Brandon Ayuk back. Deebo Samuel looked awesome last week, and Raheem Mostert looked awesome. So I think the 49ers the rest of the season is like not some team that's just like a 4-6 team that you don't have, like you're not threatened by. I think they're like a legit pretty good team.
It's just a shame about Nick Mullins because I totally agree that the 49ers are finally rounding back into form. And Nick Mullins is a perfectly good number 2 quarterback, but I do think very simplistic analysis, but I do think this game just comes down to one team is starting Nick Mullins at quarterback, and the Bills will find a way to pull it out. But yeah, hey, the 49ers are beginning. I mean, they're going to be like the classic team you do not want to play in the final month of the season.
Dago, anything on this game?
Allen practiced in full on Thursday after he had that ankle injury, so that's good. He's clearly performed slightly worse, especially throwing downfield without John Brown. That, of course, is where the 49ers have been susceptible on defense this year. I'm still worried, though, without John Brown. Gabriel Davis, of course, stepped in for 97% of the snaps. He's averaged 3 more targets per game without Brown in 3 full games this year, but he's still been behind Stephon Diggs, of course, with 12 targets per game in that span, and Cole Beasley with 7.3. So, maybe a deep league flex option, but I still sort of worry about the Bills' offense in this matchup, honestly.
Hey, and I know you mentioned some of these players, but Deebo Samuel locked into your lineups now after what he did last week. Brandon Ayuk, prior to going on the COVID list, had like 3 straight extremely strong games, and he was locked into your lineup. Raheem Mostert being back in a Kyle Shanahan running game, he's back in your lineup. I mean, that's a lot of players attached to Nick Mullins, but I guess we should just eliminate Nick Mullins in our brain and just think it's Kyle Shanahan instead.
Yeah, and Vegas is projecting the 49ers for 23.5 points. So, like, that's, like, at least respectable. That's, like, middle of the pack for this slate. So, I think all 3 of those guys are, like, RB2s, wide receiver 3s, down to flexes. They're probably going to trade off big weeks, but I'm not too scared about the Buffalo defense right now. Nice. So, yeah, I'm starting
Hayden,
all
do you have both 49ers receivers, like, in the top 30?
I think that's probably too rich for Brandon Ayuk. I think I have Deebo Samuel there. I think Deebo Samuel's probably going to have more schemed touches, and they're probably going to ask Brandon Ayuk to try to win on the perimeter a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, both of them are just so good at yards after the catch wise that you have to start both of them, I think, at least as flexes.
Yeah, the stat, Josh, I think he had 6 catches for 75 yards. That was his floor for his 3 games before he went on the coronavirus list. And of course, Deebo Samuel's come back, but I just think the offense is big enough for the 2 of them, because beyond that, still where are these targets going? I mean, Jordan Reed, Jerick McKinnon, Richie James. And I just think Kyle Shanahan will be good enough to scheme both of them enough touches to at least make both wide receiver 3 viable. And I do have both in the top 30.
I would play Jordan Reed over Zach Ertz, too.
Yes.
There's another one. That's the line. Coming on Sunday, Rotoworld Live, served by Applebee's, the Jordan Reed line. All right. Let's close out with Tuesday. Hopefully it's night football. The Dallas Cowboys and Baltimore Ravens, so it's not my new shift on Wednesdays. Dallas 3-8, Baltimore 6-5. Pat, I think it's fair to say that these are the 2 offenses that have let us down the most in the NFL this season. Look, we drafted Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, Ezekiel Elliott, and obviously Dak Prescott. It worked in the start. It hasn't been awful since Andy Dalton came back. Meanwhile, Lamar Jackson has started basically the entire season except for Wednesday, and it's been putrid. It's been incredibly bad. Worse than, like, if you said that this summer, if we put Lamar Jackson on the cover of the magazine on newsstands and said he's the quarterback 14 this year, what would have happened to us? But that's what's happening.
Yeah, and like at least the Cowboys have an alibi, like you said, where their all-world quarterback got hurt. The Ravens don't have an alibi for this, except for just, I guess, they're not making enough adjustments to some of the obvious adjustments defenses are making to Lamar Jackson. We think Lamar Jackson will be playing this game. It's not a guarantee. They're being not very forthcoming with their COVID information, which they do not have to be. It's a very difficult game because we don't know who will be out there for the Ravens. I mean, Mark Andrews, J.K. Dobbins, Mark Ingram, Lamar Jackson were all down for Wednesday afternoon football. And I mean, just speaking to the disappointment, I mean, the thing that finally unlocked Marquise Brown, besides some missed tackles, was Trace McSorley. And
Shout out Thune.
You talk about a tough scene. And but yeah, just at the very least, please get us back our Ravens. So if you're going to be disappointing, at least disappoint with your normal personnel. And without that normal personnel, this will be a very difficult to watch game because the Ravens defense was barely practiced, for like 2 weeks, still dominated Ben Roethlisberger. And I fear what might happen to Andy Dalton.
As everyone saw as well, Marquise Brown did it on a 70-yard touchdown catch without those players you mentioned. So assuming all of those players are back, you're again not starting Marquise Brown. Don't fall for the national spotlight results. Also, if Dobbins comes back, it seems like an eternity since we've seen him play football, I understand. But remember, he was used well over Ingram and Edwards his last time out. 41 snaps to Gus Edwards' 13, and he had 17 touches and 78%. I was looking for that number. 78% of the backfield snaps. So clearly a workhorse if he's healthy this upcoming game.
And the Cowboys are allowing the most carries per game, up at 30. They're last in rushing EPA defense. They're not getting better on defense. They're the fifth worst team against fantasy running back. So I think J.K. Dobbins, I wouldn't lock him into RB2 land, but he's getting closer to that. Of course, you're playing with some fire because if they go back to the three-way committee, then you're out of luck. But I think that J.K. Dobbins has looked the best, and I think that they deserve to get him some touches. That's why they drafted him in the second round. So I think down the stretch, J.K. Dobbins will be getting closer to RB2 territory.
Realized I forgot to talk about Eric Ebron on the Pittsburgh Steelers thing. We'll talk about Sunday morning. Anyways, that has led me into this question, Pat, on the Dallas side, because we just saw this Baltimore Ravens defense and secondary practically, unless you're in PPR formats, shut down Deontay Johnson, somewhat Juju other than that 1-yard touchdown. Obviously, Chase Claypool as well. What will they do against Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup attached to Andy Dalton?
Yeah, it's concerning. I mean, maybe we'll get a bit of a letdown, even though this was a loss. And it's just the Ravens. That was an emotionally taxing game, and I'm getting into terrible analysis season here. But I wouldn't be shocked if the Ravens look more out of gas next week than they did this past week. But there's nothing to like about the matchup for the Cowboys. But I just think Andy Dalton has kind of unsurprisingly stabilized Amari Cooper's floor. He's mostly stabilized CeeDee Lamb's low-end wide receiver 3 floor. I think even for a tough matchup like the one in the Ravens, you can still kind of count on 6 catches, 70 yards for Amari Cooper, 4 catches, 50 yards for CeeDee Lamb. And beyond that, we're not going to get a ceiling game for anyone in this Cowboys offense.
Well, I think there's a lot of injuries to track here because the Ravens, Jimmy Smith was on the sideline at times, Marcus Peters was on the sideline at times. So we don't know if those corners are going to be active for the next game. And then for the Cowboys, the real trouble here, Zach Martin's out and they lost Cameron Irving, their left tackle. And that is the issue because they're on backups at these positions. They were moving guards to tackle. It's a total mess right now. So I think that's the true concern because if you can't protect the outside for Andy Dalton, that is the true concern. So I'm a little nervous that we're even going to get that Andy Dalton baseline that we were getting in the middle of the year because the offensive line is now worse than that.
6.3 and 6.1 yards per attempt for Andy Dalton the past 2 games. Dallas's offense has been an absolute disaster. Pat, where do you have Ezekiel Elliott ranked this week?
Oh, God.
Yeah, he's one of those guys who barely even thought about the analysis this week. He's RB17, RB18, I don't know, whatever. It's Ezekiel Elliott. And, yeah, I mean, nothing is – no semblance of ceiling whatsoever. Too many touches to really fade outside the top 20. He's just a mid-range to low-end RB2 essentially on a weekly basis now.
I may start Zach Ertz over him.
John. Yeah.
All right, we're done. Let's get out of here. Again, go and check out Pat's rankings. They're at the top of the site. Go and check out the Building Blocks show, which is on Friday evening. Pat's on Friday afternoon with his Twitch stream, but you can find both those on twitch.tv/Rotoworld or on the YouTube channel, all that good stuff. And again, we'll be back here Sunday morning, Rotoworld Live, served by Applebee's. I guess it's not morning, but noon Eastern on Twitch, Periscope, and YouTube. And then, as you all know, we continue with a game-by-game recap show, which is available on Monday mornings out there, covering all the moments that you might have missed on Sunday. All right. For John Daigle, for Patrick Doherty, for Hayden Winks, I am Josh Norris. Up the Villa. Talk to you all soon.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights. From NBC Sports.